Hey there, so in this lesson I'm going to build up a form in Laravel and Vue. The front end is Vue and the back end is Laravel, and I'm going to discuss various aspects of building a form in Vue and Laravel. So there is an aspect of sending your request from front end Vue to Laravel via Axios, and there is another aspect of handling your validation messages which is coming from Laravel. So this is the form which we are going to build, and this is a simple contact us form with 4 fields. And when you do submit the form without any fields, it gives you the validation errors which are coming straight from the Laravel. And when you type out, it clears out the validation messages. And when you do submit a good request, you should get a success response back from the server. So this is all we are going to build in Laravel and Vue, and so let's get started and we dive into a new project which I just created named Laravel Form. And this is a blank project. I just installed it with the latest Laravel version. The Laravel version I'm working on is 7, and the Vue version which I am currently working on is 2.5.17. So first things first, we will generate a contact model which will store the contact details for us, and we will also generate the controller and migration file along with that. So I am generating a new model named contact, and along with the controller and a migration file. So we will open the migration file and add the fields which we need. So first thing we need is a name, email, and a subject, and another thing that we need is a message. So this is the basic contact table with 4 fields in that. Before we can migrate, I need to create a new database, so let's just quickly create that. We will name it Laravel Form, which is same as our project name. This is currently a blank database. We can now go ahead and configure our env file with the same name, Laravel Form. The username and password remain same. I can now go ahead and run the migrate command. So migration is done. Now I will generate my routes. So in this we are going to have 2 routes, one from which we will show the contact form, which is going to be contact create, and another one is for the post request, which will accept the request from the contact form, and this is going to be contact controller store. Basic CRUD stuff we are doing. So in contact controller, I can now go ahead and create my methods. First one is create and another is store. So in the create method, what we are going to do is simply return a view named contact. And in store, first let's just write the code for contact thing, and later we can go ahead and write the store method. So I will generate a new file, create.blade.php. Let's just have this basic HTML markup, and in here I need to pull up a couple of files. The first one is basically the app.js file. This got built and this got compiled and built, and this has all the Vue code and components inside it. So we included this file because we need to have Vue library included in the page, and also I'm going to use Bootstrap library in the page. So I'll copy and paste the code to include the app.css file, which contains all the code of the CSS libraries, that includes Bootstrap as well. Now I can go ahead and copy and paste the code which I have already done for the contact form. So here is my code for the contact form. This is the basic form, basic bootstrap form. It has 4 fields: name, email, subject and message, a button at the end of sending a message, and a reset button. On the top it has 2 divs to show a success message and an error message. By default, both of these fields are hidden by using dNone class of the bootstrap. Let's just serve our project and see if we are able to see this page. So it got served on port 8002. View contact not found. Let's see what is wrong with our... Okay, I named it create. My bad. I'll just change the name to contact. Alright, let's just try once more. There you go, we have the contact form. I'll just add a bit of padding, and also we will include the basic bootstrap classes to make it look better. So we have these 2 divs. So this is how our form looks. Currently it's not functional, it's just a basic HTML form. Now I can go ahead and write my API for the store method. So what needs to happen when your server receives the request from the form? First thing first, we need to validate the request. So I will utilize the validate method of Laravel, and we will validate the different fields. For name, it should be required. Email is required as well. So basically all the fields are required, and for email it should be a valid email. Once we have validated the request, let's collect the data in a variable called validated data, and now we can go ahead and invoke the model and say we want to pass on the validated data to create a new row in the database. Sounds good. And once we are there, we can import this class, and once we have created the new row, we can return a new response, basically an JSON response of message saying contact created. One more thing that we need to do is by going into contact model and declare a property name guarded to blank. So we are not guarding any fields, we're just letting the request flow for this example. So this is the store API. We will hit this from our Axios. So now we have the front end, basic front end ready, which is this form, and we also have basic backend API ready, which is this form. So we have the basic code ready. We will move on to the next step, which is getting the form ready, form component ready, basically creating a new Vue component. So let's move on to the next step. So I will go in my resources.js and create a new component named contact component.view. It will have a basic template. I'm keeping it blank for now, and let's name it contact component, and it will have a data property which will return. So we need to bind the Vue variables with our form. So let's just declare the properties in our form, in our Vue component. and we will declare it inside a property called form data. So we basically have four fields. These are name, email, subject, and message. So all of them by default are null, and once we have declared these, we can now go ahead and use this component inside the contact page. I'll just close all of these. Okay, so we can now go ahead and link it with this form elements. First thing what we need to do is use this component inside this page. So what we are going to do is, there are two ways to include this template, which is basically the form for your component. You can define all of this code inside here, or what I'm going to do is use this as an inline template. So what I will do is, I will say this is my contact component. It starts here and basically ends here. This is my contact component and its template is inline template. I'm doing this because this is a one-off use component. I'm not going to use my contact form again and again in the website. If you have a scenario where you are going to use this template again and again, then you should probably put the code of this inside the template tags. For the simplicity, I'm just using the inline template. All the components of your Vue needs to have a single root div, so I will define a root div here, which starts here and basically ends here. And now I can go ahead and bind my inputs to my model properties. So V model, I will use the V model directive, and I'll link it to form data.name. And similarly for other input fields, I'll just copy and paste this. Form data.email, form data.subject, and form data.message. Let's just refresh the page and see if we broke anything or if it is working fine. So we refresh the page and okay, we forgot to register the component. So what we need to do is go in the app.js file and register the component. Vue does not yet know that you have created a new component, and basically we need to tell Vue, okay, I have this new component named contact component and its location is component/contact component. So basically we tell Vue, this is my component that I am going to use, and just after this we have defined our Vue instance with an ID of app, and we are going to use this ID right here. Let's try it again, and before we can start running, we need to have the npm running. So we will start the npm. This basically tells npm to watch any changes that we are making, build the changes, compile it into app.js file, which we have already built, which we have already included in the page. So this is building, compiling and building. This is done. I think now we should see some different error message. Inline template components must have exactly one child element. So we have this contact component and this is inline. This div starts here and the div ends here. Okay, I forgot to close this thing. Sorry about that. Let's refresh again, and now we don't see any error messages. And in our Vue we have this component where we have all these 4 fields. Let's start typing in this field. So we Now confirm that these fields are reactive. Now we can move on to the next step, which is basically sending this request data to our server, and we will create a new method for that. Let's call it store contact, and in here I will have a new Axios request, which basically accepts the URL, which is contact. We are sending a post request to the contact, and we are sending the form data. So Axios works on the promise based request. So just when we send the request, we make a promise that if we get a successful response, we get the response, and let's just define two more fields here named success, which is false by default, and error, which is false by default. So if we receive a successful, we will call a new method named onSuccess, and we will send it the success message. We need another field named catch. In here we will get the error, and we will call another method from here called onFailure. Here we will send the response message. So we now need to define two more methods, which is onSuccess, which accepts a message, and if yes, we change the variable success to true. Similarly, for onFailure, we change the onError to true. Don't worry about the message, we will utilize this later. So we now have two more methods in our code. We are sending, let's review this. We are utilizing Axios library to send a post request to contact, and we are sending the form data, which this includes all of these. We make a promise that if we receive a successful response, then we will call this method and we will send the message that we got from the server. In case we get an error or we catch an exception, we will catch it and we will call this method. So let's bind this store contact method to our contact form, and we will go to the form and we will say that on the submit of this form, prevent the default action and instead call this method. Let's test if this code is working fine. So we refresh this page, there are no errors on the console. We send a blank request and it hits the server, and we get the 422, which is the valid response. So let's see in the network tab what we are doing. We are sending blank request to the server, which means that it fails at the validation, and we get the message the given data was invalid, and along with that we get errors along with that. Okay, so what needs to be done? Currently there is nothing happening on the front end. So what we will do is we will utilize these two divs to show the response to user. So we will remove dnone, so that means it is visible by default, and instead we will utilize vif property of view, view directive of view, and bind it to success and bind this one to error. So let's refresh our page and send the message, and we see this error. There was an error sending your message. One thing if you notice is when we refresh the page, you see both of these messages for a fraction of a second, and to remove that we have this vcloak here. So let's just go ahead and set the display to none. So now if you refresh this page, you won't see that cloaking anymore. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So we are till now we have created a Vue instance. We have binded the fields to the input fields, and we are sending requests to the server. We are getting the response back from the server. The next thing which we are going to do in the next step is handling the validation errors. Let's move on to the next step. So if you currently see, what is happening is we catch the error and we directly go on to the on failure method. Whatever is the response, we go on to the on failure method. But instead what we need to do is we need to catch the errors and show them below the field of which they belong to. If we get an error that the name field is required, this needs to go right below the name field. So first thing first, we need to classify here what is the status code that we are getting from the server. If it is 422, then probably we need to call a different method. Let's call it set errors, and here we need to send the error messages. If there is any other issue like 500 or 404, then probably we need to go on this method. Alright, let's create a new method named set errors. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to take all the errors that we are getting from the server and assign it to a new variable named errors. So this is a blank object, and we create another method named set errors, which basically accepts all of the errors and assigns it to the errors object. Let's test this thing. So in our view, we have now a new empty object, and we send the message. Okay, so I think something is wrong. Cannot read property data of undefined. Okay, I think I made a typo here. Refresh it again, send the message, and in our view we have 4 errors. So email field has an array of 1 with 0th key is the email field is required. Similarly for message, for name and subject. So we are now a step ahead, a step further into showing the validation messages. Next thing what we need to do is we need to show these error messages here, and also we need to make this border red, like the border red. So if you send an empty request, the field border becomes red and it also shows a empty message. So for that, probably I need another method which checks that if this error has an error for the particular field. So I am creating a new method named has error, where I'll pass on the field name, and basically it checks if the key, which is this, belongs to the errors object. Now I'm going to utilize this has error in my contact.blade.php. So Bootstrap has this class of is invalid, which is basically when applied to the text box. Let's say if we apply is invalid to the name text box and I refresh this page, it gives me a red border. But I cannot just apply is invalid to all the fields. We need to check it dynamically if the input field has an error, and if yes, we apply the is invalid class. So we will do the dynamic class binding, and in here we call the newly created method named has error, and if it returns true, we apply the is invalid field, and if not, we just leave it blank. Let's just copy this code for all of the fields and change the name of the input field. Let's try it out. Refresh the page, all the fields are empty, we submit the message and all the fields get the red border. Along with the red border, what we need to do is we need to show the feedback to the user of what's wrong with the input. So we will utilize another div, another class of bootstrap, which is basically invalid feedback, and we show this div only when we have error for that particular field in our errors object. So we show this field if we have a name of error, and if we have an error for the field name in the class is invalid feedback. And what do we show to the user? We show to the user errors object and the name field and the zeroth error element, where exactly the error message is. So we refresh this page, we send an empty request, and we get this, the name field is required. But if you think about it, we can change this to a method as well. We don't need to go into the depth of this. We can just include another method named getError, which basically accepts the field name and it returns the error message at the 0th error index. So instead of this, I can say get error of name, and similarly I can replicate this div for the other inputs as well by just changing the name of the input field. We have this for email, we have this for subject, we have this for message. Alright, let's test this out. We have this form, we submit it, and we get the proper messages, validation error messages for all of the fields. Okay, next step is when the user starts typing on this field, it should clear out this error message, which we are not doing yet because we are not capturing the event. So let's go back to our form and in our form we will add a new event named keydown, and we bind it to a new method named clear error. So clearly it means that we need to add another class to another method to our Vue instance, and we will accept the event. And what we will do is to clear the event, to clear the input, we can do delete and this dot errors and event dot target dot name. So basically what is happening is we are going to the errors object and event dot target dot name. What is this? So event is where the event happened. So if you are pressing down here on this field, this is where the event is happening, this is the target, and its name is name. For this, the name is email. So we are just passing on the name of the field where event has happened, and we just delete that key from the errors object. Let's just see this in action. We send the request, and as soon as we start typing on this field, the error is gone. So if I show you, we have these three errors right now: email, message, and subject. and as soon as I start typing on the subject field is gone, and so the error message is from the screen because of the reactivity of Vue. Alright, let's go ahead to another step where what we need to do is, if user has available errors on the form, we need to disable this button. We should not allow user to hit the server again and again if he has errors on the screen. So what we can do is we can create a computed property which basically checks, let's name it has any error, and which basically checks if there are any errors in the errors object. How we do is we utilize the object.keys method of JavaScript, pass on the object, check the length, and if it is greater than 0 it returns true. So we refresh this page. By default the button is enabled. If I send the request, the button is still enabled. There is some issue. Let's just check has any. Okay, I haven't yet used this field in my form, so we will use this field right here. This is the input button, and we will bind the disabled property of HTML to has any error. Alright, so now I think we should really check what is going on. So by default the button is enabled, we submit the form, and now the button is disabled. Works fine, right? But there is an issue with this. We clear out the form fields, why isn't this email is going off? Let's just check what is going on here. So has error email. On the email field we don't really have the name. Okay, so that was the issue. We defined the email name, and now I think it should work fine. Okay, we send the message, we type in, and it clears all the fields, and yet the button is disabled. Why is this? So because has any error is still set to true. Even though the errors object is empty, this is still set to true. Why is that? This is because what we are doing is we are utilizing the delete keyword of JavaScript to delete the keys from the error from the object, and for the Vue reactivity this doesn't happen. Vue doesn't even know that we have deleted these keys from the object. To make it available to Vue, to tell Vue that we have really deleted the keys, instead of delete we need to utilize the Vue.delete method and pass on the errors object, and as a second parameter we pass on the key that needs to be deleted. So this is the issue that I encountered while working on this form. So I just thought of letting you know that there are, for the objects, Vue isn't always reactive when you add a new property or delete the property from the object. You need to use set for Vue.set for setting the new field, and Vue.delete for deleting any fields from the object. So now let's test it again. We send the message, there are validation errors, and as you clear out the messages, you can now send the message again. The button is enabled again. Alright, let's move on to the next step where we do send the actual request to the server. So basically what I'll do is I will send a genuine request to the server, and we do get a green message from the server. So this part is working fine. The one issue that you can see is we sent a successful request, but even though the form field, even then the form fields aren't cleared out. So we need to have a reset functionalities which basically clears out the form fields for us, and that method we can bind to this button as well. By click on this button, nothing really happens right now. So what we need really is a reset button, reset method. What reset will do is basically it will loop through the object of form data, and it will set the form data field to null, which was basically by default. And if there are, let's say a user is working on the form, I think there is some issue. Okay, we forgot this thing. Okay, we refresh the form. Let's say a user is working on the form and there are some error messages on the screen, and he really needs to get rid of those by pressing this reset button. So we also need a way to clear the error messages when we are resetting the form. So let's just include another method that says clear all errors, and this basically does is sets the error object to a blank object. We call this dot clear all errors from here. So when do we need to reset? Once we reach the success stage. So I will call this dot reset from here, and we also need to bind this method to our reset button. So for the reset button, when we click on it, prevent any default action and just call the reset method. So let's test it out. We have this errors enabled. We reset it and the errors are gone. We submit a good request to the server. We get the success message and the input fields are cleared. So we are now done with the reset thing as well. So far everything is working fine. We have the validation messages that we are getting from the server, and we are showing it on the screen. We have this success message with that we are showing in case of the successful response. But if you see into the code, there is a lot of methods that we have written, and if you have multiple forms on your application, repeating these steps for all of the forms will be a nightmare. So in the next step, what I will do is I will refactor this code and we will make it into a reusable classes, reusable Vue components that you can reuse on any of your Laravel application forms. So let's move on to the next step. Alright, so first things first, what I really think is we can take off these form related methods into its own Vue component named form. So let's create a new component named form.view. It basically has a blank template. The name is form, and for the data field, this basically has these two fields. So we copy these two fields which basically belongs to the form, and we get it from here. And for the methods, I think we can refactor the code and copy. So the on success, on failure, reset, all these methods should belong to form. These can really be reused again and again in all of our forms. I think I pasted it wrong place. This should go just after the data. So we have these three methods, and if you really think, when you're making a post request, whatever you're doing is going to repeat the same for all of your forms. So we can reuse this. We can create two more methods on our form. One is post and another is get. So we are basically building our own little tiny form API for our own use. So inside the post, what we're going to do is we'll copy all of this code and put it right here. Since we are going to build a generic form component, this really needs to be a variable, and this needs to be a variable too, which we can pass it to this function. So we have this on success here, we have set errors, and we have on failure here. Alright, looks good to me. And similarly for get, what we need to do is change this to get, and same thing here. We are just going to utilize the post method in this example, but you can get the idea of where you might need to use get as well. Alright, so I can now get rid of all of this, and instead of axios.post I can just say this.post and get rid of all of this. So this is my URL and this is my data. Alright, so now since I have refactored a lot of code from my contact component into form, I need to import this form from its file, which is basically this one, and use mixins to import this into my component. So basically all of the functionality, all of the data and methods which we have defined in this component are now available to our, okay, I think I did it at wrong place. So this needs to go here, and in contact component the mixins will go. So all the methods and data that we have defined in the form component are now available to the contact component. Alright, code refactoring. Now we can refactor more. Now what we have remaining is methods that is related to the error messages, and we can assign it to a new component. Let's name it form errors.view. Again a blank template, a script, and the name is form errors. For the data, this needs to return. So what does this deal with? It all deals with the errors object. So we will assign this errors object to its own or component, which is form errors, and this deals with a single object. And we can also now copy all these methods from here to here. Alright, so these are the methods, and this computed property is also dealing with the errors, so I will move this as well. Alright, now the form errors, what we can do is import here, or I think it should belong to the form thing. So basically what we are doing is, the form really has the form error, so we will assign it to its own class. Let's import form errors. We'll just copy and paste this thing. Import form errors from its own class, and alright, so now if you look at the contact component, which basically you need to create for any of your new form, all you need to do is import the form component, define the name of the component, define the data which is there in your form, and define the Axios method. All that needs to be done. But we have done a lot of refactoring, so let's see what we have here. So there are no new errors, surprisingly. I think we are good to go. Let's try it out. So we send messages. There are validation errors on the page with the submit button disabled. We type on the fields and we send the message and we get the success. So the refactoring worked absolutely fine. One thing that needs to be tested is, what if we get to server and we encounter any other error apart from 422, that is validation failure. So let's just test that out. So I'll just introduce any new error. So what we'll do is we'll go to the contact and just comment out this line. So this will basically allow our server to throw an error which we should catch. So refresh this page, send the message, and yeah, we get this error. There was an error sending a message. So if you see in this here, you really get this message from the server. And if you want to show this message on the screen, which I don't really think you should, but in case you are developing any technical application where you really need to show the actual error that happened on the back end, to get this message, what you can do is go back to our form, and on failure, what you can do is you can define a new field here which says error message, assign it to blank, and when you reach on failure, this dot error message becomes your message that you're getting from the server. So this is the message that we received from the server, and we assign it to error message. Go back to our contact form, and this is where we are showing the error message. Here what we can do is we just display this error message. I think this is fine. Let's try this again. Yep, we can now show the error to the user. One thing to note here is the issue that we haven't yet tackled, that if there is already an error on the screen and somehow you fix the backend back to the normal and user submits the message, you get the success message, but the error message is still there on the screen. And similar thing happens when you have a success message on the screen and user sends another message and somehow the backend breaks and you get back an error message, then we're not clearing out the previous messages from the screen. So what we really need to do is, once you send the request, before sending the request, just set the properties to false. So this will make sure before sending out a new request, you are clearing out the previous error messages from the screen. Alright, so now if we have this error messages previously on the screen, now if I type something and send it, okay, I think I need to refresh the page. We have this success message on the screen. We introduce an error. I hit the screen again, and the success is gone and the error is there. So that was about it. I think we have covered a lot of aspects of dealing with a form in Laravel and Vue, and yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching.